privacy coins, mixers, non-face-to-face onboarding. 3 words and under MiCA, combined with the EBA's risk factor guidelines, 3 categories that can trigger enhanced due diligence, customer refusal, or forced token delisting. The European Banking Authority extended its MLTF risk factor guidelines to CASPs on 30 December 2024. These guidelines are not abstract theory. They define exactly which customer types, products, geographies, and delivery channels a CASP must treat as elevated risk, and what a CASP must do about it. Here's what makes this episode particularly important. The EBA risk factor framework does not tell CASPs to ban everything high risk. It tells them to assess, document, and justify their decisions. A CASP can list a privacy coin, but it must have a documented risk assessment that explains why the residual risk is acceptable. And that documentation has to survive NCA scrutiny. If you work in CASP product, compliance, or risk, the decisions you make about which tokens to list, which customers to onboard, and which delivery channels to permit are now regulatory decisions with documentation requirements. Getting them wrong in either direction, being too permissive or too restrictive without documented reasoning, creates real supervisory exposure. The EBA risk factor guidelines for CASPs organize MLTF risk into 4 dimensions. Customer risk, who is transacting and what is their profile. Product and service risk, what features of the crypto asset or service increase or decrease money laundering opportunity. Geographic risk, where are the customers and counterparties from and what are the AML regimes in those jurisdictions. Delivery channel risk, how is the customer onboarded and how does the transaction reach the platform? Each dimension has specific risk indicators that move a customer or product up or down the risk scale. Under the EBA guidelines, high-risk customer indicators for CASPs include customers from high-risk jurisdictions on FATF gray or black lists, politically exposed persons and their close associates, customers using multiple self-hosted wallets for all withdrawals, customers whose transaction patterns are inconsistent with their stated business purpose, customers whose on-chain history shows interaction with mixing services or darknet markets, and legal entities with opaque or complex beneficial ownership structures. Each of these indicators does not automatically mean refusal, but it mandates enhanced due diligence and documented risk assessment. For compliance professionals in the audience, what is the most difficult customer risk decision you have had to make at a CASP, and what was the documented reasoning you used? Was it a self-hosted wallet pattern, a geography issue, or an on-chain history problem? Drop it in the comments. These cases reveal far more about real-world risk management than any regulatory guidance document does. Privacy coins like Monero are the clearest example of elevated product risk under the EBA guidelines. Monero uses ring signatures, stealth addresses, and confidential transactions to make the sender, receiver, and transaction amount effectively untraceable. From a financial crime perspective, a CASP cannot perform meaningful blockchain analytics on Monero transactions. It cannot verify source of funds through on-chain history. It cannot trace suspicious flows. These are not hypothetical limitations. They are architectural features of the protocol. When a CASP decides to delist a privacy coin, the decision must be documented in a formal risk assessment. That assessment should include the specific risk factors identified: traceability limitations, on-chain analytics impossibility, regulatory risk if supervisors view the listing negatively, the mitigating controls that were considered and why they were insufficient. The proportionality assessment is the risk from listing this coin higher than the business case for keeping it, and the governance sign-off, who authorized the delisting decision and at what level of the organization. The opposite decision, listing a token with elevated risk characteristics, also requires full documentation. A CASP that decides to list a privacy coin must document what enhanced due diligence it will apply to customers who transact in that coin, what alternative analytics methods it will use where standard on-chain analytics are not effective, what volume or transaction limits it will apply, what monitoring alerts it will configure specifically for that token, and what the trigger for delisting would be if the risk profile worsens. This is a risk acceptance decision, not a permission slip. Mixers and tumblers, services that blend crypto from multiple users to obscure the transaction trail, represent a different kind of challenge. A customer whose wallet shows prior interaction with a mixing service has a tainted on-chain history. The CASP cannot determine whether the mixing was for privacy reasons or for laundering purposes without additional information. Under the EBA guidelines, prior mixer interaction is a high-risk indicator that triggers enhanced due diligence at minimum, and in many cases a SAR filing. DeFi presents a distinct challenge, Where a CASP provides an interface or aggregator for DeFi protocols, it may be bringing customers into interactions with smart contracts that have no AML controls at all. The EBA guidelines flag non-custodial DeFi interactions as a high-risk delivery channel, a CASP that routes customer funds through unmonitored DeFi protocols without assessing that delivery channel risk is failing its AML obligations, even if the CASP itself is fully MiCA authorized. All CASP onboarding is effectively non-face-to-face. There is no branch network for crypto. The EBA guidelines treat non-face-to-face onboarding as an elevated risk delivery channel because identity verification is harder and impersonation risk is higher. CASPs must therefore apply compensating controls, robust electronic identity verification with liveness detection, document authenticity checks, and, importantly, a pre-onboarding blockchain analytics assessment of any wallet addresses the customer identifies at onboarding. I want to hear from the audience on this one. Has your CASP delisted a token specifically because of EBA risk factor guidelines or NCA pressure? Or have you kept a high-risk token listed with enhanced controls? What was the key factor in the decision? Share it in the comments. The real answer from practitioners is exactly what the rest of the industry needs to hear. Geographic risk is one of the most mechanically applicable risk factors. FATF publishes gray and black lists, jurisdictions under increased monitoring, or subject to a call for action. CASPs must maintain a geographic risk matrix that applies enhanced due diligence to customers from or transacting with high-risk jurisdictions, has a documented policy on whether customers from call for action jurisdictions are permitted at all, and monitors whether customer activity patterns show geographic exposure that differs from their stated location. I have mapped all 4 EBA risk factor dimensions to practical CASP controls and decision templates at davincidiligence.com, including a privacy coin risk assessment template and a geographic risk matrix framework. The full audio of this episode is on the DaVinci Diligence Spotify podcast. Links are in the description. The core lesson of this episode. The EBA risk factor guidelines do not prohibit high-risk products or customers. They require that every decision to list, to onboard, to continue or to exit is documented, reasoned, and proportionate. The compliance function that builds this decision library is the one that survives an NCA inspection. The one that makes undocumented instinctive calls will not. Subscribe to follow this series. Episode 6 is the Transaction Monitoring and Travel Rule Deep Dive. We walk through a real chain-hopping typology case, show what a MiCA-authorized CASP must log, monitor, and report, and explain exactly what happens at the travel rule interface when originator data is missing. That is Episode 6. See you there.